Well, JB, for a week that was probably going to be a little bit quiet, we thought, we ended up with some real excitement and action and some real
Yeah.
surprises with New England football versus New York football and New Jersey football for that matter this week.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of the new world order. So we had some teams, that normally you would have thought a couple of years ago would have never had a chance to win, did win. And we also had a couple of big name teams that are national championship contenders lose in week two, which is kind of surprise. Not really in our eastern region, St. Thomas and Wisconsin Whitewater, but they're both big enough programs where it bears mentioning that for them to lose in the regular season like they did is kind of a big surprise.
Right, you are. And, in this crunch time feature, we are going to go game, conference by conference and pick out a game. Unlike what we did
Hmm.
last week, we've decided, hey, we'll run the scores on the screen. We've got crunch time as
Yeah,
well to give you a little bit more information here and there. But, to try to
we're
go to
figuring it
35
out. We're getting
games.
there. Yeah, we'll be here all night.
And we're doing it at 1 in the morning right now, in case you're wondering why it's so dark on
Yeah,
either one of our sides.
but that's good because I may not have power or a house tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Unfortunately, though, it seems like Hurricane Irma is moving its way as far away from where we live as possible. So far, so good.
It's not good to make light of the situation, but obviously it is tracking
Right.
to the west as of this recording. JB, how is your family doing? How are you doing with this whole storm situation?
Everyone's good. We're getting ready for some exciting times tomorrow night with kids sleeping in closets and forts to make it just extra safe. But the way things are going, I think we should be okay. I know the various meteorologists keep saying that there's going to be some turn. All I've seen for the last 36, 48 hours is just a straight line west, which is you know probably bad for maybe New Orleans or Houston if that's where it keeps going. But it's good for the state of Florida. There's been a lot of people that have been concerned. Miami seems to have been spared. I know there's some high winds starting to happen in Naples and Fort Myers, but we may actually end up getting lucky, and this may not really be so bad after all. We'll see.
Well, let's pray that that is the case. Tampa and Naples, though, do look like they're going to get hammered in some way, shape, or form or another with at least a major hurricane force winds. So that area is in our prayers and thoughts. Let's talk some football. And we'll start with the CCC as we had some real interesting activity right off the bat today.
Yeah.
Endicott 29, Bridgewater State 28. And I'm reading, you give me these nice write-ups, so I'm going to read it almost directly on this one. Goals led for long
Okay.
stretches this game, but they saw themselves fall behind 28-22 after a 19-yard Brandon Giles touchdown catch with 6:55 remaining in the game. Endicott quarterback Joe Kolaski would drive his team 61 yards to the Bears' 31-yard line. And that, in and of itself, that catch that got them eventually to, I think, either the 41 or the
Yeah.
31. I can't remember.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the Gulls started that drive on their own, I think, 8 yard
8.
line. It
It
might have
was the 8.
even been, so they had 92 yards to go with about a minute 51 left on the clock, and it actually made the Sports Center top 10 plays of the day. Just a long bomb, which I think Brendan Johnson caught, one-handed catch in double coverage, incredible play, got them past the 50-yard line. And then ultimately, I think they ended up on the 31, where basically with about 6 or so seconds left, they threw a Hail Mary touchdown pass, which was caught for a touchdown by, I believe it was Shalean Velasquez, another one of the Gulls receivers. And, started a little interesting Twitter conversation because I know you, Frank, are an official for flag football. You know a lot about the rules. You were kind of saying, not so fast, my friend. Was it a catch or not? Yeah, I saw a Facebook post. Your friends had various reactions. Some were like, oh yeah, that was totally a touchdown. Other people were like, well, maybe, maybe not. So since you're the official, I'll defer to you on this. At the time, it looked like it was a touchdown. Ultimately, there's no replay in Division III, so the call stands no matter what we have to say in this follow-up. But it would be interesting to maybe do a little point counterpoint on this since it was such a big play.
Well, we're rolling right now the number one view, as they call it, camera one, where basically you can't see anything of what's going on in terms of where the ball is or isn't. It looks clear from this one that, oh, it's a catch, but easily, and then the ball pops out late. Okay, so now we go to the replay, and great job by the Bridgewater State crew that does this game, I think Channel 9 locally over there. But you can see as we slow it down here, and we will slow it down, the ball is moving, and he keeps moving. He's coming down with it, and a lot of people think this point right about here is where he has control. But if you continue to go before he even makes contact with the player that's on the ground next to him, the ball is slipping out of his hands upon impact with the ground. And to me, that is not control still, and that's why the ball so freely came out of his hands again. So now he tries to regrip the ball, and he's going to the ground as he gets hit doing it, and he's trapped the ball on the shoulder pad of another player. And the rule in the NCAA is if you're going to the ground, the first rule is you have to be able to show the ability to make a football act or act common to the game if you're not going to the ground. So far, I'm not sold that that was the case. So now if you're going to the ground when you've secured control, you must maintain it throughout. He's got it on the shoulder pad of the player. When they make impact on the ground, that ball comes immediately off the shoulder pad. This is not a completion under the rules. Now, it is a completion. As we come back here, James, it is a completion insofar as two arms went up very early in this play, I will tell you. The goal line official probably didn't get to see half of this, and I think he was blocked out from it. The official that could have made the best call here was right in the middle of the action, but he didn't seem to be wanting to interfere with the call ultimately. And I'm not sure what he did or didn't see there. But the ball came out, but still the arms went up, extra point tried, 29-28 final. That's it. The game's official. The ECAC may write a letter to Bridgewater State saying we're sorry or we stand by it. There is a certain amount of subjectivity in these calls for officials, obviously. But in this case, looking at the review, and there is no review in college football except for the semifinals and the finals, or a championship game, the idea here is that, without review, you can't overturn it. Even with review here, it may have been tough to overturn it, I got to be honest. So my personal view, incomplete. And that should have been Bridgewater State's win. But look, Endicott went 92 yards. They earned a lot of that as it was. We don't award points based on that fact, but I mean, Bridgewater State had multiple chances to stop them short of this anyway, and they didn't do so. So give Endicott that win. They're 1-1. Bridgewater State, they're 0-2, and those are both very tight games that they lost by 1 point. I think both games.
Yeah, they did. They lost a close one to Buff State in week 1, and here they are now. The defending MASCAC champions. They haven't started conference play, but starting off 0-2 is a tough deal for anybody. But you have to give Coach DeWall and the Endicott Gulls staff a lot of credit. That is a program like them that are in the third year of building. That's something that can really take them to the next level. So whether it was a catch or not, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about did it just break the plane? Is that good enough? I don't know enough about officiating. Obviously, with no instant replay, it's hard to really know. It's one of those split-second kind of things, and the officials made the call that they thought happened. It's at the end of the day, it's still a touchdown. At the end of the day, the Gulls still had to kick the extra point to win the game. So, like you said, there was a number of chances for the Bears to not lose this game. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out for them. It'll be interesting to see, where they go from here.
Well, we had another game that featured a CCC team. There's only 6 of them, and we were talking about 2 of them here, and that's Salve Regina taking on Montclair. And this is a game that has been close in previous years, but Salve Regina really hasn't done a whole lot. I think one year they may have beaten them a few years back, but it hasn't been the same Salve team since in that respect. Either it was close or they beat them. I didn't check on this. I won't check on it. We'll try to correct if I'm wrong later. But the point being that Salve Regina holds on 26-20. Montclair had a chance with 4.5 minutes left in that game and could not come back. and it is James Dawson, who had 171 yards rushing and a touchdown. That probably is the hero of that game.
Yeah, and you have to give the Seahawks some credit. They're off to a good start, and these New England teams that are starting to knock off NJAC and Empire 8 teams. Whether they're Montclair is not the same Red Hawk team that it was 10, 15 years ago, but still, I mean, it's a great win for Salve. It says a lot about their program and the direction they're heading into. Another NJAC team that we previewed after talking to Coach Mike Cersullo at Springfield was Kane. And, man, the Pride really looked awesome today. Their defense was lights out. They basically pitched a shutout for the entire game until the final 4 minutes of the fourth quarter. Jordan Wilcox had over 230 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns,
223, I think it was, actually. Yeah. But, 223. I don't care if you run a triple option, a single option, or a double option. That's a whole lot of yards on the ground.
Yeah. That tells me that the Pride has both their offensive and defensive lines clicking, and they are going to be one of the teams to keep an eye on in the East region this year.
And then also the New MAC, it's a New England conference, but there is a non-New England team in there. That's Catholic. They beat Utica.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? 16-10. Was the final, and Pat Coleman from D3Football.com, his alma mater, wins that game. Catholic, Alejandro Rose, it is, I believe, led that as quarterback for Catholic, and a little bit shocking there.
Yeah, especially after Utica kind of dominated St. Lawrence in Week 1, and St. Lawrence took care of business today. They won their game 17-10 over Norwich to retain the Hoffman Cup, which has a long history with the Merchant Marine. It was established by a family who's, I think the dad went to Merchant Marine, the son went to St. Lawrence, so they had this idea of a trophy game between the schools. Well, now that St. Lawrence and Merchant Marine aren't going to play each other for the foreseeable future, Norwich took up the fight and gave the Saints a pretty good run. But it was one of those things where what's going on with Utica? Are they maybe not as good as we thought? Is St. Lawrence not as good as we thought? Is Catholic better than we thought? So, more of a defensive game. It was a long road trip for Utica to go all the way down to D.C. Maybe that has something to do with it. A lot of interesting scores this weekend, and that was certainly one of them.
That leads us to the MASCAC, because if we're talking about Empire 8 woes, I think you can't skip talking about the MASCAC at this point. And Framingham State, they absolutely pounded the ball in the fourth quarter to retain a lead that they had. They ended up winning 29-14. Karan Wright, who we will have on Sunday on the show, 167 yards and a touchdown, and he just pounded the ball in the fourth quarter to keep that victory alive. And I got to be honest, James, that one sticks out huge. I mean, you want to talk about Empire 8 woes and everything else, except for maybe Brockport. We'll talk about Hobart versus St. John Fisher in a second, obviously, when we talk about the Liberty League more. But the point being here that Framingham State, not many people would have given a chance in this game. I'm sure there's some grudge feelings about how people perceive them, and we'll talk to Karan about that when we do interview him. But at the same time, Cortland should be better than this, you would think, based on their history. Not so much.
Yeah, and really, I think obviously Karan gets a lot of credit for the work they did on offense, but a lot of the credit too should go to the Framingham defense, which I believe intercepted Cortland's quarterback Stephen Ferreira a couple times, maybe 3, causing some turnovers, and that really ended up being a big difference in the game. Framingham State is basically putting the East region on notice that they're the real deal. They won convincingly against Endicott in Week 1. They are not just your run-of-the-mill, like if you draw Framingham State in the playoffs, you're going to be like, oh, we got this New England team. That's an easy win. These guys are probably going to be a tough out for anybody, no matter who they play down the road.
Agreed, fully here. We got to ask Matt Noonan one thing, though, and I'm sure he'll be watching this at some point. I've heard it referred to as Framingham, not as in, let's say, the picture frame behind me, that shoulder. Right. No, that shoulder. But not the picture frame.
I should know this because my late brother-in-law was a teacher in Framingham for technical high school there. I'll have to ask my little sister about that. She'll know for sure.
I think it's Framingham. I think they take the long A out of it. Yeah. We'll see. We'll ask the question because if they're going to be playing like this, we better be getting it right. That's my thought. And speaking about right, you'll want to be paying attention to our interview coming up. How'd you like that transition?
Nice.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thank you. That's why you pay me the big bucks for the show.
Exactly.
Empire 8, Hobart St. John Fisher. This game started out horridly. I got to be honest with you. I was trying to watch a little bit of it, and just from the stats alone, it didn't feel right. It was Hobart 3 yards this, 3 yards that, 3 yards this, 10 yards that, 3 yards this, 3 yards that. It was like, what is going on here? This is a big play offense that's crawling down the field, but they win 31-3 and keep St. John Fisher out of the end zone, which, if we remember what happened last week, is a small miracle after what Brockport did to them with 603 yards of offense.
Yeah, the defense really did a 180 because Fisher brings a lot of the same things to the table as the Brockport offense did, and they really improved tremendously. I mean, it was, like you said, it was a kind of an ugly start. I mean, Hobart and Fisher, I think they combined to go like 0 for 5 in their first initial possessions. Hobart couldn't convert on 4th down, and then same thing with Fisher. They missed a field goal, and it was kind of a really sort of fits and starts until the Statesmen finally kind of got things going, really mostly in the second half. But the Hobart defense had its back against the wall a few times. They really gave up certain going all those 4th down attempts to put their defense with short fields a few times, and they really held up. They put a lot of pressure on Michaels or Michelle's with the new official quarterback. They kept Chambers mostly bottled up, and you have to give them credit. They really improved tremendously after what was a pretty bad Week 1 performance.
So you look at how Buffalo State barely beat Bridgewater State last week. You look at how Alfred barely beat Ithaca last week. You look at St. John Fisher going 0-2 to start the season, and you look at Cortland losing to Framingham State, and you kind of got to say to yourself, what's going on? And Hartwick gave up a 21-point lead to WestCon last week as well. You got 5 teams right there that are showing a loss right off the bat. Got to give credit to Brockport. Joe Germanero, who we had texted with earlier this evening, congratulate him again. He had over 300 yards, I think 350 combined. He was a leading rusher and passer in that game for both teams. How does that happen?
Brockport is definitely the real deal. I think that the Empire 8 at this point is theirs to lose. I don't know if Alfred can really contend with the kind of offense and defense that the Golden Eagles are bringing to bear. So maybe if you're a Hobart fan, you're thinking, best case scenario, perhaps we run into them in the playoffs for a rematch. But then again, you also have to notice, kind of quietly in the background, there's this team from Troy named RPI that started off 2-0 and is winning their games pretty handily with both very good offense and defensive play. So I don't think you can quite crown Hobart just yet in the Liberty League. There's going to definitely be some close games yet coming up.
And give Liberty League participant RPI some credit that they handled WPI in the Transit Trophy 36-14. It feels like it's going to be that Hobart versus RPI type of race ultimately. St. Lawrence looks okay after today, but against Norwich doesn't give me much to go gaga over, as the kids say.
Especially after Utica lost to Catholic. That's a big head scratcher. But you have to give the engineers from RPI some credit, especially Christian Kapp, the place kicker, who had an extra point blocked, and yet he scooped it up and ran it in for 2 points. So
We'll have to remember that. Pat Coleman always asks for special teams players of the week, and I think that would be a definite one we'll have to call to his attention.
That would do it. And, as the understudy to Andrew Franks, who, unfortunately is no longer with the Miami Dolphins. But I did see on Twitter, Frank, and I did tweet it out that, Sebastian Janikowski's on injured reserve. Andrew's from Carmel, California. I hope his agent's on the phone and getting Andrew a shot with the Raiders. We'll see.
Sebastian's also costing him about $400,000 a game, I believe, for Oakland, and so there becomes part of the rub with whether they retain him or not. But they had some kickers in there prior to Game 1 practicing and showing their stuff. Andrew was not one of them, I don't believe, but it doesn't mean that he can't be brought over there, which would be a good fit as a California native. We wish him luck. Yeah. The NJAC. I love how you say in the feature column on our notes, nothing really fits here.
Yeah, week 1, we had these blockbuster games with Del Val against Wesley and Frostburg against Stevenson. It was like this great, top 25. This is awesome. And then week 2 rolls around, and it's like, all the games are lopsided. None of them are competitive. It's kind of a letdown, honestly. So, yeah, when I was looking through the scores, I was kind of like, Del Val won. Good. It's just, it was kind of – nothing really jumped out at me this weekend with those two conferences.
I'm going to cut you off for 1 second here and just say that Salisbury did bounce back with a 63-7 win against William Patterson. That's an important one. And Frostburg State with Grayson Boyce and Connor Cox with a 400 yards of total offense that they contributed toward. They've been impressing me as well. We'll talk about the MAC in 1 second, but the NJAC generally here is one of those situations where with Springfield beating Kane and Salve beating Montclair, you've got a kind of an interesting balance of power going out with the East conferences that you normally rely on. And in this situation, I'm not so positive about the NJAC even. It looks like this season is going to be a matter of teams, not conferences necessarily, JB.
Yeah, and, especially for, some of the people out there that don't know everything about the D3 playoffs like you or Wally Wabash, our friend Greg Thomas, the fact that Springfield is off to a 2-0 start, having a win against an NJAC team, a win against a possible conference champion, a prior year playoff participant. Let's just say that Springfield loses to Merchant Marine on October 14th. Still coming in at a 9-1 record with that kind of strength and schedule in a Pool B situation, it might be good enough to bump out some of those Texas teams down south, and that would be we've got a lot more football to go, and maybe Springfield runs the table, and we don't have to worry about it. But if I'm a Springfield Pride fan, I'm thinking, okay, we got these games under our belts. They're good wins, and they're going to show up well on the resume. So if there is something that happens, an upset, or that you get tripped up during the regular season, whether guys get injured or whatever, there's still a chance to make the playoffs.
Bounce backs also occurred in the MAC. Stevenson, Dan Williams with 247 yards in the 38-9 win over Kings. And Del Val, as you were pointing out a little bit ago, goes to 2-0. Not a bounce back per se, but Devontae Ellis with 172 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns in a 34-3 win against Lycoming. But the one that surprised me after seeing FDU Florham, we kind of whiffed on this last week, you and I. He passing for 590 yards and 5 touchdowns. It's one of those situations, and Widener can't put really many points on the board last week. Did they put? Was it 6-0 final?
To Rowan, who played in a nightcap game tonight. I didn't see that final, but it was like, where did that come from?
Well, it's a score, as I go back here, the score was 49-7. Then Widener wins that game. You would think FDU would have put up much more of a fight. I understand they're about 100 places different in the top 249 that they do in kickoff for D3Football.com, but I thought maybe the tide was changing based on week 1. Let me ask you a question, though. And we saw this in major college football as well. Why do they go to week 1 super matchups instead of week 2 and end up having a very dull week 2 because of it? Why isn't it flipped? so that teams can get their feet under them and have their best possible product ready to go for these tougher teams if they had played more than one out-of-conference game, let's say?
Well, it's a good question, and I guess can you see? I'm wearing my other alma mater shirt. So USC played Stanford tonight, and
I'm taking that out in post-production. Sorry.
What's that?
I'm going to take that out of post-production, so nobody's going to see it.
Oh, okay.
I'm kidding, James. Don't worry.
So I do think that you have a point that it is good to have that tough game in week 2 versus the opener. Why it works? I think the problem is, especially in pretty much every level of football, there's a lot of these 9-team conferences, and so you really in the scheduling of trying to get that one good out-of-conference game to start off the bat is really the only time you can squeeze it in. That's the only sort of logical reason I can think of why that happens. Now that there's been some movement and realignment, like Liberty League and Empire 8 aren't going to have conference games until basically October, so that's a little different, and so they're doing more of a round robin, which has provided some interesting games, but not so much on other hands. It just depends, and every year it's kind of a crapshoot.
And just so folks know, Rowan beat Southern Virginia. You saw it probably on the screen earlier, 28-19, which really is not the margin that you would think that Rowan would beat Southern Virginia by. And so that's a little bit of a head scratcher as well. I think we also had that Christopher Newport game tonight, yep, which was against Hampton-Sydney, and Christopher Newport won 20-7. So that takes care of some of the nightcaps that we didn't have a chance to see. Hartwick beat Alfred State 45-0, and there's some late action there that was expected, obviously. Winners, losers, etc. at this point. Why don't I start this week? I made you start last week. Winners-wise, this earpiece I've got, that's a big winner because I can actually not hear myself this time, and it's okay. You don't have one? What the heck? Okay, I'll buy you one, don't worry. With our big operating budget we have for this show. Folks, this software should tell you what our operating budget really looks like. Winners for me include, Endicott. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and they were both actually in that game today, and you cannot take that win away from them. So we talked about earlier in the game. I think it's the wrong call by the referees, but guess what? Touchdowns on the board. Extra point is good. 29-28 celebration. So there's my main winner. Union, believe it or not, I will say it. Union against Coast Guard, even though Coast Guard was team number 193 out of 249 coming in, this was their second out-of-conference win since the end of the 2011 season, and they've played multiple, obviously 3 to 5, depending on the season. And so you got to give them credit, and congratulations to Coach Behrman and company. I don't like the schedule. I've been outspoken about that, but look, it's nice to have a win. The one warning I always give, and I've been giving to alumni, and I'll say it out loud on this show right now, is you have to be careful when you try to stack your schedule this way, James, because if you win with the resources you have, because you basically dumb down the schedule per se, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Coast Guard or whatever, but when you take the 5 games that they have out of conference, they just don't measure up. They're all teams in the hundreds or worse in the rankings coming into the season. Mm-hmm. Then when you go back to school later on and say, hey, I need more resources now because I want to, build up things, school like Union's going to say, you're winning with those resources already. We don't need to give you any.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of ironic, but we'll see how it pans out.
So hopefully this is kind of a one-hit wonder schedule, and I think it's almost going to be forced when the Empire 8 and Liberty League have a scheduling agreement that we believe is forthcoming with the Buffalo State move. So those are my winners. I'll talk about losers in a second besides you and me. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. One of the winners I'll throw out, we didn't really cover off on the ECFC, but SUNY Maritime is quietly doing some pretty good things out there. They won the 10th annual Chowder Bowl or Chowder Cup in a 37-32 game. It was pretty competitive, exciting, a lot of passing, offense. And so looking ahead to week 3, the Privateers against Merchant Marine is a game that I have circled on my calendar. I know it's going to be the Mariners' homecoming game. They've had a week off to prepare for that, so hopefully they'll be ready, because it looks like, and it's happened to them a few times over the years where the Privateers come in and trip them up. So Coach Toop and Coach Kroll have their work cut out for them. I know they'll be preparing for it, but that should be an interesting one. And so definitely one of the winners this weekend from the ECFC is SUNY Maritime.
By the way, I'm a loser for not catching the fact we didn't cover the ECFC in this rundown. So let me also say congratulations to Hassan John Smith with another 159 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 44-12 win over Dean. John Smith had 2 one-yard touchdown runs to basically break open that tie against Union in the fourth quarter last week. So John Smith is definitely showing his worth there for Hassan. And also, Gallaudet almost beat Greensboro today, and Gallaudet's like one of the worst teams in the rankings right now. Union has to face them soon. Could be interesting if obviously Union against Greensboro probably would be a rout by Union, so I would still say Union routes Gallaudet, but you never know. They're showing a little bit of a pulse there. So there was ECFC. Any other winners before we go to losers besides me?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think this is obviously going to come off as bias, but I do think Hobart was a big winner today. Not just the fact that they won, but the margin of victory, the way the offense played. Unfortunately, Tyner Barfield left the game with what looked like an ankle injury. But for the first time in a while, the Statesmen really ran the ball well. They, Shane Sweeney is going to do good things with the passing game, and he was not quite perfect. He was like 20 out of 26 for 256 yards or something like that. No interceptions though, so that was perfect. It was just a nice balance of both running and passing. I think the Statesmen rushed for 160 yards, which is ironic because I think that's the same number that Washington and Jefferson put up against Fisher last week. And so a more balanced attack for the Statesmen bodes well. And they really needed this win to avoid going 0-2 for the first time since 1999.
Losers, Empire 8 except for Brockport. We're giving kudos to Brockport. They could have been in my winners column, obviously, because of German Aero and company's performance again. And but the Empire 8 in general right now, with those 5 losses we pointed out, really is a head-scratcher right now. And they have put themselves, again, in a position where probably no team, unless it's some combination of Brockport and Alfred, are eligible for the Pool C bid, or a Pool C bid later on. And so there's a real problem there. And I would say New York in general and New Jersey, because suddenly New England teams are joining the party, as I said elsewhere. And that's going to be a real problem if they do build up strength, because it comes down to recruiting at the end of the day. And a lot of these New York and New Jersey schools, James, are trying to go into New England, or have done it historically. I know RPI was a big New Jersey, Massachusetts type recruiter. And so suddenly the competition's way up there, and if these teams are winning games, then why not just stay home and go to WPI instead of RPI type of idea, or any other school that was winning this weekend? If football is really what you want to do as the number one thing for college at the end of the day, and there are people that do that in Division III too. So that's going to be a real problem. New York and New Jersey are my losers today.
Yeah, I have to say that, just as the kind of the main user of our at D3FB Huddle on Twitter, I have to say that the New England schools social media game is far and beyond. I mean, they actually make the New York and New Jersey schools look like they're, it's like 20 years ago. They're so far ahead of the game with putting clips out, with just keeping constant activity going. And I imagine, you and I are a little bit older now, Frank, but if I was a 16, 17-year-old recruit, which I was a million years ago, these are the kinds of things that will be, I'm looking at my phone and, there's Springfield, there's WPI, there's, the CCC. There's all these different New England conferences tweeting stuff out left and right. The MassCAC is very active on Twitter. NJAC, Empire 8, Liberty League. I mean, you're lucky if Hobart tweets out like once during a game. I mean, it's just, and that, unfortunately, the statesmen have a track record of 15 years and so on, going to the playoffs and winning winning championships. But for these these New England and other programs, I think they're really winning winning on the social media front, and that's really paying off on the recruiting side. As far
One
as
thing
losers,
I want to interject real quick before we leave that subject, though. We now have what I would call the Joe Germanario Challenge, and it wasn't a New England team, but we're going to have a New England guest with us, don't forget, coming up. But last week, 2,600 and some views of the video interview between us and Joe. And so there's a challenge right now. Can other schools beat that? Now, you just talked about the New England school social media game. We'll see how it goes this week with Karan Wright when he speaks with us. We did see Springfield come in, and Coach Cerezulo's interview I think got about 2,000 views. Didn't beat the player. Didn't expect him to necessarily, but still 2,000 is pretty good. For us, that's like holy cow. People are seeing us finally, literally and figuratively. But my point being that, come on, schools, when you do get it in the Huddle invite, make sure you beat Joe's number, and then we'll have Joe back on to see if he can beat his own number or your number later on if he can continue winning games. Losers on your side.
This bums me out, but it was like 42-0 around halftime with Rochester playing Carnegie Mellon. The Yellow Jackets are still struggling. I mean, they had a rough offseason, and this season's off to a tough start. I mean, Carnegie Mellon's a good team. Sam Benger's probably one of the best running backs in the country. So you kind of figured that the Tartans would do that, but kind of piggybacking on your New York, New Jersey, comment from before. Kane obviously dropping and really being dominated by Springfield is a tough one. So I'd lump some of those in there. The only other one I could think of, I am a little surprised, as much as Brockport has been so good, that Ithaca would lose 31-0. I don't think that's happened in a long time, even though it's a new coach over there. But those are some surprising numbers from the weekend.
With Brockport's success, I thought the state schools in New York now in the Empire 8 were going to begin to show a pulse and do what they were supposed to do. But then you look at the Buffalo State and the Cortland State scores, and I understand that Cortland State goes by Cortland now. Brockport State goes by Brockport, the college at Brockport. Now Buffalo State, but it's still Buffalo State because there is a Buffalo, and so they can't be confused like that. But the point being, these state schools that seem to have the resources to dominate in Division III, especially in the Empire 8, just with the exception of Brockport right now, have not gotten there yet. Buff State, we've been waiting for years now. And granted, they did beat Whitewater in its heyday on a Week 2 game about 5 years ago.
Was that like 2012 or 2013,
I think it was 2012. We were talking about it the other day, I think it was. But nonetheless, Coach Boyce joined us on that show. I remember the next day after they flew back, and he was exhausted. But that was the exception, not the rule with Buffalo State. Cortland State shows glimmers of hope, then falls off like a game like today. Just no momentum or consistency they can keep alive. And it's very interesting to watch that, and how the Empire 8 with the state schools just can't seem to get to that edge it needs to get to overall. So that, it's an interesting point to watch as we keep going. How do these private schools keep competing with the public schools, the state schools, and currently they are to this certain degree, although granted it was Framingham State that beat Cortland, but Brockport against Ithaca, so Ithaca being a private school. It was Bridgewater State that challenged Buffalo State, Western Connecticut State against Hartwick. So I guess other people's state schools are actually doing better than New York's state schools in the Empire 8 when you're looking at the whole of this thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the, what I've seen in Division III the last, 5 to so years is that I think the programs that have been successful have been able to recruit the borderline FCS, maybe not necessarily starter, but maybe second string and or possible starter player, and bring them down into the Division III ranks. Nate Fleming, who's one of the senior linebackers at Framingham, if we say that correctly, I think he was a transfer from Assumption College, which is a D2 school, I believe. That you see, guys like, I think it was Garrison from Brockport. He was a D2 transfer. And Hobart's John Delisante, who had a 60-yard touchdown, he transferred into Hobart from UNH. So I think where the some of the programs that are having success, they're going out and they're recruiting these FCS caliber guys. And for some of the private schools that may have tougher admission standards, I mean, they're going to the camps at like Cornell, at Penn, Columbia, and places like that to get guys that maybe don't have enough of a resume to get into the Ivy League, but they're still very talented student athletes, and they can do well at the Division III level and get a great education, and it's working out.
James, let's close this one out, but we will take a look at the week ahead on Tuesday with Matt Noonan, I believe, and we will also have crunch time in the meantime and interviews with Karan Wright, and we haven't picked a coach yet. Who are we going to go after here? We have to figure this one out overnight.
Yeah, we'll sleep on that one.
Okay, sounds
it's late,
good.
And hopefully next time.
Hopefully Hurricane doesn't keep you up.
Yeah, like I said, it seems like the good news is that slowly kind of just keeps going straight away from Florida, and keep our fingers crossed that that's the case. For those who have reached out, and I've appreciated that, Ted Baker from Hobart WOS gave me a nice shout out along with other statesman families from Florida. Our place here, we're Miami-Dade, code. Our windows can handle gusts up to 130 miles an hour. That's kind of what you got to do down here. I think we'll be fine. The way the news has been reported, it looks like things are going away. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. But you have to take Mother Nature seriously, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so we're going to plan to ride it out. And no school Monday or Tuesday, so the kids are happy. And we'll see where it goes.
I was going to say maybe you were doing the Jim Cantori during your off time here in the huddle, because your hair's a little bit up in the air. Maybe you were doing one of those windblown sessions out there.
Yeah, one of my buddies from Hobart, Steve Pederak, who was a hockey player, is the producer for Jim Cantori's show on the Weather Channel, and he's Jim Cantori's in town, Steve's there too. So gotta hopefully he's staying safe. I know. Jim does a good job covering all these national events, and hopefully, this whole Irma thing will just be yesterday's news in a couple days.
If you're Jim Cantori's producer, from what I hear, you're pretty high on life, but we'll not go too much further down that road right now. James, get some sleep. We'll talk to Karan Wright tomorrow or today. That's if you're watching this on Sunday, and we'll have a coach to be named later, and crunch time coming up. We are going to put out an audio version of this as well, and last week's as well. We ran into problems last week, as we've chronicled elsewhere. Till then, this is In the Huddle. Go on. Oh, you have a candidate. Okay, let's talk about off camera, just in case.
All right. I think I know where we might have to go to. We'll see.
We'll talk to you here on In the Huddle.